Hey guys, this year I turned 35 and now I'm just playing the waiting game before my body makes its inevitable decline into old age. To pass the time, I thought a nice video would be to complete a series of mostly physical challenges, a lot of which you'll be able to try for yourself. And then each year I'm going to repeat them and I'm going to see how my fitness and my strength decline as I age. Where possible, I want to provide normative values. These are values for the general population. Since it's nice to see values for men and women, I'll be joined by my lovely wife who likes a challenge slightly more than she dislikes being on camera, so you won't see too much of her. Let's kick things off with what I've labelled general health. It's a bit of an introduction to the two of us and then we can move on to some of the more physical tests. So I am 35, my wife is 32, we're both 176 centimetres, 5'9" for those in imperial. Then we have our weight, body fat and waist circumference, as well as BMI, body mass index, which is derived from height and weight. I found a study which tries to define some normative data for body fat percentage, normal for men being 17.6 to 25.3, for women 28.8 to 35.7. Women tend to carry 6 to 10% more body fat, so they aren't directly comparable to men. The reason for taking a waist measurement is that it can identify visceral fat, which is fat around your organs, and excess fat here is more dangerous for your health. To be in the low risk group for my background requires me to be under 94 centimetres. In the corresponding women's chart, that value is 80 centimetres. Next is blood pressure. We have a cuff at home, but I appreciate that you might not. I've plotted both arms on our respective charts, and we're both at the high end of normal. A few years ago, I was bordering on low blood pressure, and the nurse recommended that I add more salt to my diet. My wife is Eastern European, so the amount of salt she already adds to her food has to be seen to be believed. So in both cases, we probably need to cut back a bit. Peak flow involves taking a deep breath in and then breathing out through the tube as fast as you can. It's usually to identify people with low values who may have things like asthma. I'm not sure what benefit there is to being above the normal range, but my wife scored 460 and I was up at 740. The last one in the health category is blood glucose. I have a GlucoRx and we both measured twice and took the average. Again, we're both on the high end of normal. Within normal, there's a generally agreed upon optimal range, which we're outside of, and that's 4 to 4.7 millimoles per litre, which is 72 to 85 milligrams per decilitre. Fasting glucose can be more susceptible to short-term eating patterns, and a more reliable measure for diagnosing things like diabetes would be a blood marker called HbA1c. This is said to be like a snapshot of the last 3 months. My HbA1c is right in the middle of optimal. My wife will get hers tested over the summer. If you're worried about your risk of diabetes, then getting your HbA1c tested is a good first step. Okay, moving on to fitness. We measured our resting heart rate while seated and wearing a pulse oximeter. Alternatively, you can just find your pulse, count how many beats there are in 30 seconds and multiply that number by 2. Here are some values from the US Department of Health. At 54 beats per minute, I just sneak into the athlete category and my wife is above average. Next is VO2 max, which is the maximum rate that your body can utilize oxygen. It's one of the best measures of cardiovascular fitness and aerobic endurance. The real test is often done in a lab with a mask and a treadmill, but a reasonable approximation can be obtained from other tests. In a previous video, I did 6 different tests and took the average. The tests we chose were the Queen's College Step Test and the Bleep test. One is based on heart rate and the other is a maximal effort test. I also found an equation which predicts VO2 max based on age and resting heart rate. That puts me at 51.4 and Evelina is at 41.5. The step test involves going up and down a 16.25 inch step for 3 minutes. This is often the exact height of 2 steps in your home. And that's following a metronome set to 96 for men and 88 for women. You then measure your pulse as soon as you finish and plug it into a calculator, which I've linked below. My heart rate was 136, which equates to a VO2 max of 54.2. And for my wife, it was 144 beats a minute and a predicted score of 39.2. I wanted to include a max effort test, and since my wife hates running, she chose a 2-kilometre row. Her pacing was pretty spot on. She finished in 9 minutes 24.7. There is a calculator on the Concept 2 website which gives her a lowly score of 21.8 for VO2 max. This is probably closer to the true value since she's completely sedentary, but I should note that because rowing is more technical than running, She could refine her technique and then she'd get a faster time without actually getting any fitter. I chose a Bleep test, which is a shuttle run with cones 20 meters apart and following the beeps in an official audio. I made it to level 10, shuttle 10. I was actually really happy with this because I usually crash out on level 9. That gave me a predicted VO2 max of 49.9. Those scores would put me around above average or good. If you average my wife's 3 scores, you get 34, which is probably below average despite not showing on this chart. After that, there were a few static endurance ones. Firstly, a dead hang from a pull-up bar. I couldn't find any normative data for this, but we managed 32 seconds and 1 minute 20 respectively. Then a front plank on the elbows with failure considered to be when a straight line isn't maintained from shoulder to ankle. This one does have some performance values. 6 minutes is needed to be considered excellent. The world record is an eye-watering 8 hours and 15 minutes. I wasn't sure what to put in for flexibility, so I put in fingertip to floor distance, keeping your feet together and legs perfectly straight. You bend down and touch your toes. You can go beyond them if you can. In this data set, before the toes is measured as a -centimetre, beyond them is a plus. We're both very slightly beyond our toes, which ends up being average. Finally, a breath hold. I'd like to think it has some correlation with fitness levels, but obviously you can train it independently. The normal range is 30 to 90 seconds, but for example, my friend's been doing the Wim Hof breathing method, and he can now do a 4-minute hold. There was a study that tried to define norms for breath holding on the in-breath and the out-breath. We only did the traditional hold after breathing in. Please do not try this underwater or in water. It can be incredibly dangerous if you pass out. Okay, on to my favourite ones, which is strength and power. First up is grip strength, best of 3 trials. This is using a Camry hand grip dynamometer. This is a good purchase. People get quite competitive when you ask them to test their grip. I recently spent 14 weeks training my grip, so it's the strongest it's ever been. Looking at the normative values for males and females, we're both considered strong. There were some explosive tests which required a 10-minute warm-up. We did 3 trials each of a standing vertical jump and a standing broad jump. I spent several years working on my vertical jump, but I haven't trained it directly in over a year. My standing vert peaks around 64 centimetres. Here I was consistently around 56. Evelina managed 36 centimetres. The broad jump is measured from the back marker when you land, usually your heel. Some people say you have to stick the landing for it to be a valid jump, but we weren't following that. The broad jump and the vertical jump are both in the NFL Combine, where scores can go right up around 3 meters 30, 130 inches. I was quite happy with 240, and coordination probably stopped Evelina from a better distance. The website I used had a few different push-up tests. The one I chose was maximum push-ups in 60 seconds. Each one is to 90-degree elbow flexion, which is checked by first holding that position, then placing an object so it's touching your chest, and then you know that each rep has to be deep enough to touch the object while maintaining good push-up form. This is short-lived for my wife. She could only manage 3 reps. I was a little disappointed to not get above 41. I remember doing 53 push-ups in gym class at school, probably with sloppier technique, and interestingly, about as impressive as 38 push-ups aged 35. The last one in this category is pull-ups, so going to chin over the bar and then full arm extension at the bottom. I'm actually in the middle of a pull-up program, and a couple of weeks ago I tested my max and I got 12 reps, so I'm submitting that score. Since my wife can't do pull-ups, she substituted in a flexed arm hang, which is a test they use in the US Marines. You only technically need 15 seconds to be a Marine. She impressed me a lot by holding for 13 seconds. Last but not least, I wanted to include some sort of mental ability test, but there weren't too many options. I ordered some at-home tests from Mensa, the High IQ Society, but the more promising testing was done on a website called Quantified Mind. I found an article by Nassim Taleb where he's effectively debunking IQ as an intelligence test. He said while it's really good for measuring people who are below average, what he calls unintelligence, it's pretty useless for anyone who's above average. So with the huge caveat that these scores mean nothing other than that we're good at taking IQ tests, my score was in the top 1%, which would be an IQ of at least 135, and my wife was top 2%, which is at least 132. The test that seems far more promising, and one you could go and do right now, is on a website called Quantified Mind. If you create your own test, go to Special Focus, and then Quantified Mind IQ version 3, you can do the exact same battery of tests that we did. I think the score is out of 1,000. There are 11 different tests, each one taking a few minutes. My average score was 588 and Evelina's was 434. A few of my favourites include having to memorise 15 made-up words, the classic say the word not the colour, and trying to copy a sequence in a 5x5 grid, and the sequence gets longer by 1 square every time you get it right. I scored highest on finger tapping, which is thanks to years of practice on button bashers like track and field on the N64. So those are the tests. We managed to fit most of them into a single weekend. If nothing else, it's a good bit of banter. While it's interesting to see how you compare to other people, the true measure will be this time next year when we repeat the tests. It seems like a very long-term video series, but hopefully it gets more interesting each year. I'd love to have people join in, especially if they're going to do it on an annual basis. I've shared details in the description below of how best to do each challenge. So I'll hopefully see you in June 2023. Thanks for watching.